Okay, so now we're going to talk about international trade. The first question to ask is why do we have international trade? Let's remember we're talking about markets and private firms. Why do these private firms see it in their interests to export and import? What makes it so advantageous for them? Well, it's all built into the system, into the price mechanism. It's automatic. The invisible hand, as Keynes once said. Um, Economists have identified two principles which give advantages to international trade, to trading across borders. One is absolute advantage. They've identified that countries have different factor endowments. Factor endowments. We're talking about factors of production, so land, labour, enterprise, and capital. So every country's got something different. For example, Afghanistan maybe won't be able to build cars as well as the UK because maybe it hasn't got the labour, hasn't got the engineers, hasn't got the enterprise and the infrastructure. So each country has different factor endowments, and one factor endowment will be able to produce more of a specific product than another country, and that is absolute advantage. For example, we've got Indonesia and Brazil here. Indonesia could produce 500 tons of rice and at the same time, with the other half of its resources, produce 200 tons of coffee. Or Brazil could produce 200 tons of rice and 500 tons of coffee. Here we can see Indonesia has an absolute advantage at producing rice. Maybe the weather's better for rice, maybe they have the expertise, etc. Brazil has an absolute advantage for producing coffee. Now, to understand absolute advantage, we've got to also understand opportunity cost ratio. This is the ratio of what was given up to specialize in a specific product. So, for example, if I've got one computer, with the resources to build that one computer, maybe I could have built 6 tables. So the opportunity cost ratio is one computer to 6 tables. We'll see that, why that's important in a second. Now let's say that Indonesia and Brazil specialize in their absolute advantage products. So instead of 500 tons of rice, Indonesia puts all its resources, so double the resources, into rice, and it produces 1,000 tons. And Brazil produces 1,000 tons of coffee. Here we can see the totals have gone up. The total production before was rice 700, coffee 700. Now it's 1,000 and 1,000. Now, if we see that the opportunity cost ratio of producing 1 ton of rice in Indonesia is 0.4 of a ton of coffee. So every time Indonesia produces 1 ton of rice, it's given up 0.4 of a ton of coffee. And Brazil has given up 2.5 tons of coffee for producing 1 ton of rice. So we can see that an exchange rate of 1 ton of rice for 1.5 tons of coffee could be advantageous for both, because 1.5 is between these two opportunity cost ratios. If we go to the next slide and we imagine that 1 ton of rice is worth 1.5 tons of coffee, maybe Indonesia produces 1,000 tons of rice, exchanges 300, gives it to Brazil, so Brazil has 300, and Brazil, for that rice, gives it 450 tons of coffee at a exchange rate of 1.5 there. So here we take off 1,000 tons of coffee because 450 go to Indonesia. And we can see everybody has benefited in every product with this absolute advantage. If there's trading, that trading means if you specialize what you're best at, that will be using the resources in the best possible way and increase the production, and so we create an advantage to trade. If we're specializing, we need to trade. And we know with the market that always tends to go towards the most efficient, most equilibrium model, and so there is this stimulus for private companies to specialize and get very big and then trade. So that's absolute advantage. The second advantage is comparative advantage, because not every country is good at all products. Some countries are terrible at producing all the products. You know, America, they say America can produce cheaper and better products than any country, you know, with technology and robots, etc. But it's still worth it trading. This is called comparative advantage, because what happens here is the country that is not good at producing anything uses its resources to produce what it's least bad at. And so the country which it trades with can focus its resources on what it's best at. We can imagine, you know, maybe America could produce clothes better than Bangladesh, but it's better that America focuses on producing airplanes and Bangladesh specializes in clothing, for example. Here we've got an example of comparative advantage with USA and Bangladesh. We've got USA producing 4,000 coats, 10,000 shirts. Bangladesh is not good at competing on either products with America. So it's producing only 1,000 coats and 8,000 shirts. But here we can see that Bangladesh is least bad at producing the shirts. Its opportunity cost is every shirt 1/8 is sacrificed. So and whereas the USA, it's 2/5 are sacrificed for every shirt. 2/5 of coats. Now, if we specialize, let's have a look. So we decided that USA can produce 8,000 coats, puts all its resources in coats, takes them out of shirts, and Bangladesh puts all its resources in shirts, so it can produce 16,000 because it's taken half its resources out of coats. And we've got the totals here. Now, if we add 5,000 to 18,000, that's 23,000. Here we can see it's gone up a little bit. 8,000 plus 16, 24,000 units. So we can see there is an advantage, and that extra 1,000 can be used to trade. So both countries have the benefits of that specialization and increase in total output. Okay, it can also be looked at in terms of resources, comparative advantage. For example, this is the number of hours needed to produce 20 pairs of shoes. We've got Russia needs 6 hours, whereas Vietnam can do it in half the time. But for smartphones, Russia needs 3 hours, whereas Vietnam can do it in a third of the time. It only needs 1 hour. So obviously, here there's a comparative advantage for Vietnam to focus on smartphones, and Russia to specialise on pairs of shoes, because then we should get much better total output. Okay, so what is free trade? First of all, free trade, we're going to define it. It's the exchange of products or services across national borders without any restrictions. So we're not talking about any barriers. These barriers we know can be in form of, bureaucracy like paperwork. Countries use bureaucracy as a means of stopping imports, maybe, or even health and safety. Russia's just stopped Germany exporting to Germany by saying they need exporting gas, by saying they need to do inspections. So they're slowing free trade by saying it's not safe. They're going to do inspections on their pipes which carry the gas. But they may make forms that need to be filled out with, I don't know, Italian lawyers, and it's all written in Italian, and it becomes very complex. Maybe the forms, hundreds and hundreds of pages, etc. Or they could have taxes on imports, or even subsidies. If you subsidise your farmers, for example, the foreigners won't be able to sell. They won't be competitive, so they won't export from their countries into your country. So that's a way of restricting free trade. So free trade is without these restrictions. What are the benefits? There are some disadvantages, but there are lots of benefits to specialisation of free trade. Generally, free trade ends up with specialisation. So because of the way the market works goes towards the most efficient and effective use of resources. So countries end up specialising. It allows, we could say, it allows specialisation. Free trade allows specialisation, and that will be the most efficient use of resources. So that could be a benefit. But also, it should be the increase. It should increase employment. You don't just increase the output, the GDP, the world GDP, but also people will be more employed, and living standards raised because you will be producing more. So the supply will mean prices come down and goods and services are more available, etc. Okay. Now, it means that, the factory endowments are different, so it means countries can specialise what they're best able to produce. So we've said that really. The competition itself should put pressure on firms to keep prices low and increase the quality of products. I remember 20, 30 years ago, Fiat was very protected. In Italy, the government really stopped foreign competition, and Fiat was able to sell its cars without much competition. And Fiat became like a public company, very relaxed. The quality wasn't so good. It was very inefficient because people, were able just to sit in their jobs, and it became a poltrone and a privilege, if you like, rather than the fact that they're there because they're the best person for the job. etc. So it does keep prices low and increase the quality of products. And that also means that companies can purchase raw materials cheaper. If you know there's a lot of competition, it means that companies can keep their costs down by buying the raw materials with which they will produce much cheaper. So you know that should be also factored into the equation. You know. The fact that companies are producing so much and they're specialising will create economies of scale. We know if you produce on a very big scale, you can make savings. You can get the average costs down because you're making more use of your fixed costs. I don't know if you remember that early IGCSE lesson, but you know, and just an example, Tesla built a factory, the biggest factory in the world for producing electric car batteries, and by producing on such a large scale they were able to bring the cost of the batteries down, because they weren't just producing for America, they were producing for the world. And that was one way of trying to make electric cars competitive with you know, fossil fuel cars. So that's very important, isn't it? There should be a wider variety of products. Can you imagine Italy ever producing sushi? I can't. The fact that we're all so different all around the world, all the different cultures have such different perceptions, such different imaginations, and that means they will produce products and ideas that are very different. And if there's international trade, it means that diversity will be available to all. So it should widen the variety of products considerably. We can see in the old Soviet system how, you know, not having so much international trade really reduced their products to low quality, low production, and low, very restricted variety. You know, maybe you get one type of car with a few colors, etc. So this really helps. Trading possibility curve. So this should explain, this curve should explain the benefits of specializing and trading. If we can imagine that a company produces, or a country produces 40 million units of clothes and 20 million units of food. If instead it specializes in producing 50 million units of clothing, so it uses all the resources for the clothing, and then trades 10 million units of the clothing to obtain 20 million units of food, it can achieve this position B. So it's actually shifted the curve to a better position. Managed to get the same amount of clothing but a bit more food from its strategy of specializing and trading.